This week is an update.
Is there any video settings for Is there a video now? There an updated video now?
Okay, the demand for an updated AW3423DWF settings guide has been absolutely crazy, and I can only apologize. I committed to releasing an update probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I didn't deliver. There is no excuse. Honestly, things have been a bit difficult at home. Motivation has been a bit low in terms of where the channel is going and how many subscribers and views and revenue we're generating. But reading through all those comments, the motivation is almost just kicked back in. So we're not going to waste any time here. We're going to get straight into an updated, detailed AW3423DWF settings guide. From A to Z, you're going to get everything you need in this video, updated to today's status with the latest firmware. Before I get into it, there is one thing I just want to touch on. Burn-in. I've been using this monitor now for 2 years. I bought it back in February 2023. I released the first video for this monitor back in May 2023, so just a few months later. Now I've spent 2 years using it. My use case is 80% gaming, 20% web surfing or productivity and video editing. I haven't done anything crazy special in terms of OLED maintenance, but there has been zero issues in terms of burn-in. I use the monitor for about 2 to 4 hours every day. So it's not a crazy use case. I'm not using it for work for 6 to 8 hours or beyond. But still, 2 to 4 hours every day for the past 2 years, not a single issue. There was one moment where I thought I noticed a bit of a line on the screen, but on the next pixel refresh, that disappeared. So that may have just been a momentary issue. So we'll talk about what I've been doing for the past 2 years in terms of maintaining a no burn-in panel. And I'll give you some tips and tricks on that in the end. But without further ado, let's head straight into the settings.
Okay, so the first thing we're doing is heading over to the Dell website and downloading the Dell Display Manager. Very handy software that allows you to control most of the settings of the monitor directly from your PC. So once you've got that installed, head over to the software, which you can access from your system tray at the bottom right. And once you're in here, on the top right corner, click the settings button, go into the update, make sure you have the latest firmware installed. This is, at this point in time, M3B107. It was released back in April/May 2024. The way to install your monitor with the latest firmware will be described very clearly on the website where you can download it. The procedure is that you've got to have your monitor connected to your PC via a USB cable. Just some tips from my side. Make sure you don't have any unnecessary USB connections to your PC because they can sometimes interfere with the installation. The other thing is just remove any other monitors, whether it's connected with a HDMI, DP or USB. Don't have any other monitor connected to the PC when you're doing this firmware update. Okay, so once the firmware update has been completed, we're now going to talk about the most important thing first, which is the color profile. Now, these are divided into 2 sections. We have the SDR color profiles and the HDR modes. We're going to talk about HDR mode separately. First, let's talk about the SDR. There are 3 options. You can stick with the sRGB mode. This is the most color accurate mode that has been tested by Monitors Unboxed. Rthings has been credited as being very accurate. However, the general consensus is indeed that it is a very washed out color mode. All the colors seem very washed out. They're not very vivid. The screen doesn't pop. And that's what we want from an OLED screen. And I tend to agree. And that may be because we're not used to seeing undersaturated colors in most of our TVs and monitors. So if that's the case for you and you want to have something a bit more vivid and more dynamic in terms of the color saturation, then stick with the standard mode. Standard mode is definitely not as accurate as the sRGB mode in terms of color accuracy, but the colors pop. It looks nice. It's very vivid. I've been using standard more than I use the sRGB now over the past 2 years that I've been using this monitor. If you are still dissatisfied with the color accuracy that you're getting out of the standard mode, then your only other option, in my opinion, is to go to the custom color. Custom color will allow you to tweak the RGB profiles in a broad range of different settings. I'm going to show you that in a minute. However, the only way to really do this properly is to have your monitor professionally calibrated or by buying a calibration device and doing it yourself. There is another way to do it, which is by buying calibration profiles online. There are some providers that let you download those profiles. For example, the one that I have been using is from TFT Central. So if you head over to TFT Central and search for ICC profiles, if you become a patron for just $1 or £1, they're not a sponsor for me. I'm just explaining what I have done. I've used a few different calibration and ICC profiles. This seems to be the best one. I'll explain what ICC profiles do in a second. To explain this properly, I've got to switch over to the hardware interface because some of the settings don't show exactly the same in the Dell Display Manager. I'm now going to show these settings one by one in terms of all the settings you need to do directly on the hardware interface. I've got the Dell Display Manager here as well. Remember, we're only talking about SDR mode here firstly. If you are sticking with the standard mode, I'm going to go through this. Select standard mode. Game enhanced mode stays off. And dark stabilizer, you can go to level 1 if you play a FPS shooter where you need that. Otherwise, leave it at 0. Console mode stays off. Some people out there that believe you should keep console mode and source tone mapping on, which is an option that comes on once you turn this on. 104 back in 2023 particularly was the one where this issue was fixed. Before that, you had to have the console mode on. You don't need it anymore now. It's probably giving you a 2 to 3% improvement. I don't use it. It doesn't give me a noticeable difference. But what it does do is that every time you switch between SDR and HDR, you've got to turn console mode on and off. Just leave it off. That's my recommendation. Of course, you may have your own opinion on this. Alien Vision, that's just some things that you can use to help with, well, maybe cheating in a game, but you don't need those here. Over in brightness, 40 is my preference for brightness, and leave contrast ratio at 75%. Nothing to do in input source. Nothing to do in the Alien FX lighting. Here in display, we can select the sharpness. I leave that at 70 for all of these settings. Smart HDR and HDR we'll talk about later on, so please ignore that completely for now. And the rest of these menus allow you to tweak some things, but there's nothing here in terms of color settings. In the other part down at the bottom, you have DDCI/CI. That should be on. That's what allows you to do the settings for your monitor through the USB connection. So leave that on. OLED panel maintenance should be on as well. So there's pixel refresh, which I'm not going to do now. And then there's panel refresh, which is a harder refresh that takes a bit longer, which you don't need to do yourself. This will all happen automatically when it needs to do it. There is also a factory reset here. So if you do some settings and end up screwing something and not quite sure what's gone wrong, you can factory reset your monitor from here. The other good option here is to have the self-diagnostic. You can use this to cycle through all the colors, and this will allow you to check for any burn-in issues on the panel. As you can see, my panel here is absolutely perfect after 2 years of use. No issues. Keep clicking through those, you'll eventually end up back on your normal screen. Standard, as I say, is the vivid option. If you want to have a more color accurate option, then you go with the Creator Color Space sRGB and Gamma 2.2 mode. Colors are a bit more washed out. You can already see that on the recording here. Everything else remains the same. Game enhancer mode off, dark stabilizer, you can do level 1 in competitive gaming for FPS, but other than that, leave it off. Console mode off, Alien Vision off, brightness 40, contrast 75, and sharpness at 70. And that's it. Those are the settings that you need for these color profiles. There is some other settings you need to be aware of when using either the standard mode and the creator mode. And that is to ensure that your ICC color profiles are completely removed. So the way you do that is to head over into Windows Color Management. Here, you will see that there may be some color profiles attached or installed to your PC. What this is doing essentially is that there is a hardware color profile, and then these profiles are applying a software color profile or adjustment on top of your hardware coloring. The general consensus is that it is best to remove these because some apps work well with them and some apps don't. It can cause differences in your experience from app to app. That is my recommendation, to just remove these completely. So click the Use My Settings for this device button here, click these profiles, whatever they may be, and remove them completely. Now, just be wary that the ICC profile advanced color is a HDR color profile. I'll explain the HDR color profiles in a moment. The reason you see an ICC profile here for me is that because I'm currently testing a ICC profile that I got, as I just explained, from TFT Central for the custom color option. So that's the final option. I'll just explain how to do that. If you go into color mode all the way down into the custom color, here you ignore all the other settings and you just go into gain, which is the main one. You can set your RGB profiles here yourself. And that's what you would get from the calibration, either done by yourself or if you get a calibration profile. The settings I'm using currently recommend that I have this ICC profile installed as well, which is the one I am currently using. There you have it. Those are your three options. sRGB for a color accurate, no nonsense mode, but ensure the ICC profiles are removed. Standard for a more vivid, more dynamic, but less color accurate mode. That's my recommendation. Stick with the standard mode if you don't want to mess about with calibration. And then custom color if you want to try calibrated color profiles instead. Now, with that done, we're going to talk about the HDR mode. So again, in the Dell Display Manager, you can do this completely in the Dell Display Manager. You don't need to head into the hardware interface. So head over to gaming, and here you can see the HDR mode. There are two modes that I recommend you can switch between. The Display HDR, which some people call the True Black Display HDR, and the HDR Peak 1000. HDR Peak 1000 is the proven, more accurate version. That's the general consensus on all reputable websites online, be it Artings or Monitors Unboxed. Display HDR has slightly less accuracy. However, this is the one that I use most of the time. And there's two reasons for that. Firstly, HDR Peak 1000 is just too bright. I feel it causes me eye strain. So I stick with Display HDR for that reason. It's just a little bit less bright, and I haven't noticed any issues in gaming or watching movies or anything else for that matter. The other reason is longevity of your panel. The brighter those pixels are burning, the more susceptible they will be to OLED burn-in. HDR Peak 1000 is pushing them to their absolute limit. If you don't enjoy it, there's no point in stressing your hardware to that point. So my recommendation is to stick with Display HDR and forget about everything else. However, if you want to stick with the most accurate mode, then it's HDR Peak 1000. With that Display HDR selected, the way to switch to HDR mode is to type Windows Alt B on your keyboard, and it will switch over. When you do this, you may notice that the colors feel very washed out. And that's because, again, Display HDR is applying its own hardware profile on the colors. And a lot of people complain that they don't look very nice. So the way you get around the washed out colors for HDR is by downloading this tool called the Windows HDR Calibration Tool. You can get that from the Microsoft website. So once you open that up, you can click the Get Started button, and it will walk you through a number of different settings, which are fairly self-explanatory. The only one that I want to talk about that is of importance is this one, the color saturation. Here you can select how saturated you want the colors to be. I use 80, and that makes the HDR content look a little bit more poppy, for want of a better word. The colors are more vivid. It looks nicer. It may not be accurate. It most certainly isn't very accurate, and there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with using an ICC profile at all. So there's an option. If you want to do it, you can give it a go. If I show you this now in my color management, you will see that I have a ICC profile advanced color selected, which is the profile that I created. If you want to stick with the hardware HDR color profiles, then remove these ICC profiles, as I've said before. However, if you want to try something and see if it makes your experience better, then this is how I have done it. In terms of the way these color profiles apply, I just wanted to show you that if you right click on your Windows and go into display settings, you will see color profile the same as the one you see in your ICC profiles. This is currently in HDR mode, so it's showing the HDR calibrated profile, which is the advanced color option. If I go back to SDR mode, you will see that it automatically switches to the other external default that you see there. and that's the TFT Central color profile that I've currently got installed. So it automatically switches between them. If you remove these ICC profiles, then this area will just show blank. So just check that that is definitely gone blank when you remove these profiles if you are going with that option. So with those settings completed, we now do a number of settings within Windows. Now, these aren't really monitor settings, but they're just things to do to make sure you're getting the best experience out of your monitor. First thing to do is to make sure your resolution is correct. And if you head over here into Advanced Display, just make sure that the refresh rate is also correct. Secondly, you want to make sure that the game mode is set to on. And finally, we're going to head over to the HDR settings, which will show as off because we're not in HDR mode. So once again, Windows Alt B to switch over to the HDR mode, and a number of new options will appear. Here, you want to make sure use HDR, HDR video streaming, and auto HDR are selected. And then you have a little slider here that allows you to change the SDR content brightness. Now here, I'm going to show you how this works by opening a video in YouTube. So you will see here that when I change this slider, only the SDR content is changing the brightness. The HDR content, which is this video, is remaining exactly the same. So that's what the slider does. It changes the brightness of the SDR content around your HDR content. My preference is to set this at 35, but this is totally a personal preference. You may want to go higher or lower. And that's it for Windows settings. Now we're going to head into the Nvidia control panel. So right click on your desktop and head over to the Nvidia control panel. Here in Manage 3D Settings, first thing you want to do is click the Restore button to restore all the settings to default, because you may have changed some of these settings in the past. There's only 3 things we need to change here, in my opinion. The low latency mode should be selected to Ultra. The monitor technology should show G-Sync compatible. And the power management mode should be set to prefer maximum performance. After that, if you click change resolution, you just want to check your resolution is correctly set and the refresh rate is set to the highest. And that's it. Click apply and close the window. And that is it for the settings. The only other things you may want to do are to ensure you've got the checks in place that help you with keeping your panel burn-in free. So you can see here I've got my taskbar set to automatic hide. So if you just right click the taskbar and go to taskbar settings, you want to go over to taskbar behaviors and select automatically hide the taskbar. We're just basically trying to make sure that there is no static object ever present in one place, which will cause burn-in. And the second thing you want to do is just remove all icons from your windows. Now I've got something here as a folder that's just temporary because I'm working on this video at the moment, but your main Windows desktop should be free of any folders that will be sitting in the same place, again, which may cause burn-in. The second thing you want to do is make sure that you have a nice array of wallpapers selected as a slideshow, which are set to cycle through as quickly as possible. That way, the picture in your background is changing. In the description, I provided a link to a Reddit sub where you will find some nice widescreen wallpapers, which you can download into a folder and have a similar setup. And that's it. The only other thing of note in terms of maintaining your monitor's burn-in life is the pixel refresh. So I just wanted to mention that you don't need to worry about just stopping everything you're doing every time there is a pixel refresh alert on the monitor. Every 4 hours of use, it will say that it needs to refresh your monitor. Just carry on doing what you're doing. And once you've finished your work, when you turn the monitor off, it will ask you if you want to now go and refresh it. If you by mistake cancel it, then you can go in manually and just do the pixel refresh anyway. But it's nothing to worry about. I haven't been following that absolutely religiously. It's just when it asks me if I can do it, I'll do it. Most of the time, I'll just ignore it. And then the next time I turn the monitor off, I'll get it done. And that's it. 2 years of use, 2 to 4 hours a day, 80% of the time gaming, not a single burn-in issue so far. So it's been great. And with that, those are all the settings. As a quick summary, if you want to stick with the most color accurate profile but do not want to spend any money, then sRGB is the way to go. Standard mode for something a bit more vivid. And if you want to get into calibration, then you need to use the custom color. Those are the only three I would recommend. Use black level for your FPS competitive gaming, but don't use it for anything else. It really makes your colors look weird. ICC profiles, in my opinion, should be completely removed for the standard and the sRGB modes. For the HDR modes, use either display HDR or peak 1000. If you find the colors are a bit washed out with your HDR modes, then you can calibrate and create an ICC profile that will help increase the vividness of your colors, but be warned that that may cause some inaccuracies in some applications. And then apart from that, just enjoy your monitor. The only way you're going to enjoy your monitor to the fullest is by playing about with these settings and getting to the point where you feel, wow, okay, that looks nice now. And that's how I've got to the point where I enjoy the monitor. You have to play about with these settings and get to your own conclusion. There isn't a one-size-fits-all settings guide out there that is absolutely the best. That's why you have so many settings, because things can be changed to your preferences. So have a play with the settings and see what works for you. And once you reach there, enjoy your monitor and allow yourself to relax and not have all this anxiety or fear of missing out that you're not enjoying your monitor to the fullest, because at the end of it, even if you have the odd few settings not enabled, the difference is going to be a 5% or a 3%. You're not missing out on a lot, but the anxiety you cause yourself by worrying about every single little setting is not enjoyable. So with that message, stay calm, have fun, and I'll catch you in the next one.